Storytime about why I believe P. Diddy turned my husband into a demon. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I have to tell you that my husband was never perfect, but he was a loving, considerate husband. He took care of me in a way that I can't even describe. He was a business owner and basically asked me to quit my job so that I could work with him. He took care of all the finances and all of his administrational work. We had a really great life. Yes, we did fight like any other couple. At the end of the day, we listened to each other and we communicated. He and I got married in 2002. But everything changed 2 years later. His best friend invited him to his bachelorette party in Miami. And now I have to be clear about this. I wanted him to go. I wanted him to have fun and let loose. My husband and I work very hard, so I wanted him to have fun. 2 nights into his trip, I receive a phone call from him. And at first I think it's a butt dial because I couldn't really hear what he was saying. Suddenly he started speaking into the phone in a way that I had never heard him speak before. He was scared. He told me that him and his friends were in a celebrity's house, that someone was giving him things to drink, and that somebody had put something inside of him. And it gets so much scarier. Part 2 is up. Storytime about how I believe Diddy turned my husband into a demon. Disclaimer, this is not my story. On that phone call, my husband sounded scared. I had never heard his voice sound like that. That somebody kept giving him things to drink, and that somebody had put something inside of him. And when I asked him, he said that they did it through his butt. At first I laughed. First I thought he was drunk and just telling me a joke. Then he said that he was scared for his life and that he wanted me to come get him. I explained to him that I was a 6-hour flight away. They were forced to sit on a floor in this dark room, and Diddy and these other men started chanting and speaking in tongues. He says that their voices had changed. They sounded like demonic monsters, but they were being asked lots of questions. That's when I started to cry and I told my husband to get out of there. And suddenly he hung up. Kept calling him back until finally I fell asleep again. Next morning, as soon as I open my eyes, I get a phone call from my husband. He answers so chipper and happy, and I asked him, "What happened? You've kept me up all night worrying about you." And he said, "What are you talking about?" That's when he told me that he did not remember calling me. Part 3 is up. Storytime about how I believe P. Diddy turned my husband into a demon. Disclaimer, this is not my story. When he told me that he didn't remember that he called me the night before, I freaked out. I told him to come home immediately. That's when he tells me that he only remembers that him and his friends went out to a party. So I told him everything he said about going to Diddy's house, somebody kept giving him something to drink, and how somebody put something up his butt. That he heard Diddy chanting and speaking in tongues. My husband denied everything. 2 days later, my husband comes home. Chills ran down my spine when I realized it was not my husband. Physically, it looked like him, but spiritually, he just wasn't there. It's as if his soul had been sucked out. He became incredibly aggressive, started reading demonic books. At night, he would just start speaking in a different language, something I couldn't understand. And the scariest part, sometimes when he would wake up at night, I could not recognize the face I was looking at. It would transform as he was speaking. After a year, I decided to move out of our house. I divorced him. Years later, I found out from his mom that she never heard from him again. I heard that he assaulted a girl and went to prison, and after he got out, he joined a cult. Scary.
About my stepsister and I. So a little background information. I was 16 years old and a sophomore in high school, and when I was 5, my parents split up, not due to any drama, but because my mom realized that she was gay. My mom and dad stayed best friends, and I would split time between them. Things were going good until my dad had to move because he got a job promotion. Meanwhile, my mom was dating this girl, Rachel, who had a daughter named Maya, who was an absolute nightmare. Maya moved in and I had to share a room with her. She would constantly steal my stuff and I didn't say anything because my mom was in love with Rachel. Well, at my dad's going away party, I was supposed to watch the alcohol, but I got distracted. And while my back was turned, Maya was chugging beers and causing chaos, of course. Wouldn't expect nothing less of her. Fast forward a few weeks later, my mom had went to go comfort my dad because he was having a really bad panic attack. So I was left alone with Maya. Per usual, she started bullying me, and after too many insults, I snapped. So we start physically fighting, and then all of a sudden she kisses me. Well, let's just say things escalated from there, but we pretended it never happened. Like for part 2. Part 2 about my stepsister and I. So like I said, her and I were physically fighting, and then she kisses me and things escalated, and I just never said anything about it after that. Well, then days later, Rachel walks in with her friend while Maya and I were hanging out together, and Rachel was getting a little bit too cozy. So I took some photos to prove that Rachel was cheating on my mom. So I sent these photos to my mom, who called me. She was furious at both Rachel for cheating and at me for what happened with Maya, which I don't even know how she found out. So later on that night, my mom comes home and we pack up and we leave, and I never saw Rachel or Maya again. My mom was, of course, heartbroken, and my dad wasn't mad that I like girls. He was just mad that it happened with my stepsister. So I got grounded for 4 months, but life has moved on, and my mom found a new partner, and they're getting married, and my dad is engaged too. And as for me, I'm living my best life, dating a smart, beautiful girl, and embracing who I am, aka a proud lesbian. Storytime about how my boyfriend got myself and another girl pregnant at the same time. So a little background information. I was 18 and a senior in high school whenever this all happened. And I've been dating my boyfriend, who we're going to call Ivan, since I was 15 years old. And he was truly my first love, and everything was going great until our senior year. Ivan started acting super weird out of nowhere, ignoring my calls and going out way more than usual without me. And then one day, another girl answers his phone whenever I called. And when I confronted him about it, he said that it was his sister playing a prank. And I ignored these red flags, of course, because what are we? Colorblind. Anyway, soon after this, I realized that I'm pregnant, and Ivan was thrilled about this. Well, fast forward a little bit after I find out that I'm pregnant, he casually admits to me one day that he did it on purpose because he was afraid that I would leave him whenever I went off to college. Fast forward, things got worse when I found out that he had got another girl pregnant, but she was 7 months along. Not only that, but his mom thought that we had been broken up. So I end things with him. Like for part 2. Part 2 about how my boyfriend got myself and another girl pregnant at the same time. So like I said, he admitted that he got me pregnant so that way I wouldn't leave him whenever I went to college. So I broke up with him, and while I'm dealing with my pregnancy, I lost one of my closest friends, and then I lost my baby 6.5 months in. But despite all of this, I finished high school and got into college and started volunteering at a hospital. And y'all will not believe this shit. The one day, I run into Ivan at the hospital that his girlfriend is giving labor in. And he has the nerve to sit there and apologize and say that he wanted our family back. And that's whenever I told him, sir, our baby's gone. Like, I lost that shit. So then later, he called me and he asked if I was pregnant again. But I just blocked him and his whole family after they kept trying to guilt trip me into getting back with him, even though he literally had a baby with another girl. Fast forward, over a decade later, I've graduated, I have a great job, a house, and I'm engaged to the love of my life, and we're planning to start a family, and I've healed through a lot of therapy. Ivan's married and has kids, but he's still living this drama-filled life. Storytime about how my whole class found my teacher's OF. So a little background information, I was 16 and in 10th grade, and my best friend Maya and I were walking in the hallway getting ready for first period. Now, even this early in the morning, the rumor was already going around that Miss J had an OF. Fast forward, Maya and I get to first period. 10 minutes after class started, Miss J put a problem up on the board. After she gave us a little bit of time, she was like, okay, who can solve this? And as she's about to call on someone, there was this guy, Jake, in my class, who was passing notes to this one girl, Jessica. And if you're wondering why they were passing notes, it's because we were not allowed to have phones in this class, of course. Anyway, so then Miss J is like, can you read that to the class, blah, 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 blah. And the note literally said, did you hear about Miss J's OF? She finished teaching the rest of our class, but we didn't see her for like 3 days after that. And I guess she wasn't fired because she had an OF. It was because there were students subscribed to it. And she knew about those students that were subscribed to it, and she didn't do anything about it.
My father-in-law is forcing my husband to break up with me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. This is a 3-part story time, and I'm doing a full face of pink makeup today. My husband and I have been married for 2 years. Now, we did get married very, very young. By very young, I mean I was 18 and he was 19. When we started dating in high school, his dad was totally against the relationship. See, my husband was super popular. He played on the football team. All the girls chased him. He also played basketball and was perfect at everything he did. As you can imagine, was extremely strict with him. He was not even allowed to go out on weekends. Me, on the other hand, my parents are pretty much hippies. They let me do whatever I want. We're all very spiritual. My parents have full trust in me. Because of this, I make smart decisions. I actively seek my parents' advice. I even told my parents I lost my virginity when I did. And we had a big conversation about it. It was not dramatic. It was not like, oh, you shouldn't have done that. They just support me in everything I do. Now, my husband's parents are not the same. They tell him not to do a lot of things. They try to control him. So as we were dating in high school, his dad kept telling him to break up with me. He claimed that I was holding him back and that because of me, he spent less time training, which technically, yes, is true. But at the same time, you cannot stop your son from experiencing human relationships. In fact, he actually broke up with me for 2 weeks, but then we got back together in secret. Everything culminated when he asked me to marry him right after graduation. His parents were absolutely against it, but my parents were all for it. You guessed it, go to part 2. My father-in-law wants my husband to break up with me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I was sending me on Instagram. This is a 3-part story time, and I'm doing a full face of pink makeup. When he asked me to marry him right out of high school, his parents absolutely freaked. They went to my parents' house and told me off for saying yes. In other words, they were completely blaming me for the whole thing, as if their own son didn't go buy a ring and ask me to marry him. He even did a beautiful proposal, which he had been planning for months. But at this point, his parents didn't even know that we were boyfriend and girlfriend. When they came to my house, his mom, my now mother-in-law, started crying and yelling at me. She told told me that I was ruining their family, that I was trying to steal her son, and that all I really cared about was their money. By the way, my parents were middle class, but we were not destitute. His parents are very rich. They own several businesses. But of course, I'm not after their money. That's when they said that if we did end up getting married, I would have to sign a prenup. And I said, yeah, I want to marry him because I'm in love. At this point, his parents knew they couldn't stop us. We were going to get married with or without their approval. But thankfully, his parents came around and let us get married. We had a quaint, small wedding. It was so magical. But his parents wanted him to go to college to play football. In other words, they wanted him to be the next Tom Brady. They made him train for hours, and they didn't even let us live together for the first year we were married. And because they were supporting him, he couldn't say no. They had us on a schedule. Could only see him for about 2 to 3 hours a day. And we were married. 2 years later, he's playing for a football team. But his parents keep thinking that I'm dragging him down. So now they're trying to convince him to leave me. Go to part 3. My father-in-law is trying to convince my husband to divorce me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, and this is the final part of the 3-part story time. I'm doing a full face of pink makeup. After a year of us being married, his parents did not allow us to live together because he needed to focus on football. So obviously, I was living with my parents. I was focusing on my own studies, but his parents did allow us to see each other 2 to 3 hours a day. Now, you might think my husband is a total pushover, but let me explain something. His parents paid for all of his training and his entire college tuition. They gave him the best of everything. He got sports massages every single day. They even installed a cold plunge in their backyard. They also had a full gym setup where he and his teammates would go work out every single day. In their house. Obviously, he did not have time for little old me. After a year of this, I couldn't take anymore. I wanted to be with my husband. So I gave him an ultimatum. Daddy tell his parents that he and I wanted to live together. That's all I wanted. I was even willing to pay for half of the rent. And he told his parents, they said fine. And they bought us a house. Obviously under my husband's name, not mine. Fast forward another year up until now. I've heard his dad tell him on several occasions that he needs to divorce me. That he could find a much prettier wife once he becomes bigger in the NFL. And I walked in on his mom telling him that maybe I can't even have kids. And that he should have me checked. My parents-in-law hate me. I sometimes feel like I am holding him back. They make us miserable. My parents think I should just walk away from the marriage, but I'm too in love. Should I confront my parents-in-law? Help me think of what I should say to them. My husband signed up for my sister's OnlyFriends. Should I divorce him? Disclaimer, not my story time, instead of me on Instagram. My husband and I have a really toxic relationship. When he and I first started dating, I was extremely jealous. I would instigate fights almost every single day. Now that we're married, I'm definitely less jealous. But he's always been jealous throughout our relationship. He tries to control everything I do, down to the way I dress and even the people I can or cannot hang out with. He even insisted that I quit my job, which I did. He's invested a lot in Tesla and crypto, so he makes a lot of money without having to leave the house, which yes, is totally amazing. But that means he and I are together all the time. And with his jealousy, sometimes I just can't stand him. I've tried to help him with his jealousy because I used to be in that place. And when I try to talk to him about it, he just gets mad at me. Whenever he sees that I post something on Instagram, he gets angry. He says that I'm looking for attention, which of course I am, but not from guys. Everyone posts on social media because they want to show off their life. A little on my sister. We're identical twins. And we're really, really close. Unfortunately, my sister got laid off from her job last year. That's when she decided to start her OnlyFriends. I support her in everything she wants to do. She's actually making really good money from it, so she's really happy about it. A few days ago, I got on my husband's phone to look for something. When I see my sister's pictures, part 2 is up. My husband signed up for my sister's OnlyFriends. Should I divorce him? Disclaimer, this is not my story time, it's not me on Instagram. A few days ago, I got on my husband's phone to transfer some money from his account to mine. When I started looking for his banking app, I noticed something else on his screen. I had never seen this before, so I clicked on it. And as soon as I opened it, I see my sister's pictures. And I knew it was her OnlyFriends right away. By the way, I had never told my husband that my sister had an OnlyFriends. She wouldn't even post about it on her social media. So the fact that he found it makes me believe that he had my phone bugged or something. But here's the thing. He was using a different name for his account. So it was likely that my sister did not know it was him. From there, I could see that he was following a bunch of other girls. And when I went to their messages, he had paid over hundreds of dollars every single day to all of these girls. Can you imagine how much money that is? My husband came into the room and saw me on his phone. Of course, he didn't freak out because he never thought that I would find it. But I confronted him right away. But he didn't even flinch. He said he had every right to go on OnlyFans because it was the same thing as going to any website. I told him to at least unfollow my sister and he said that he wouldn't. He said he loved it because it was like watching me do naughty things. Then he said, "Isn't this better than cheating on you?" I was flabbergasted. Part 3 is up.
Story time. My boyfriend cheated on me with the girl best friend. So a little background information. I was 17 and a junior in high school, and my boyfriend and I had been dating for a year. But just a little backstory about when we got together. So there were definitely some red flags that I missed, okay? One of them being that he had a girl best friend. And I don't care what y'all have to say if that makes me insecure or what, but coming from someone who has been the girl best friend, I knew this was not good at all. especially whenever we first started dating and she was still being super friendly with him, meaning she would hold his hand, she would hang on him 24/7. And when I told him I was super uncomfortable with that and I felt like there needed to be some boundaries, he was like, yeah, I told you what it was whenever we got together. So if you don't like that, then just break up with me. Looking back on it now, that was also a red flag because I feel like he was telling me to break up with him so that way he didn't have to break up with me, like for part 2. Part 2 about how my boyfriend cheated on me with the girl best friend. So like I said, she would still hang all over him and he pretty much told me, if you don't like that, then you can leave. Obviously, I did not want to leave because I liked him and he was my boyfriend. So I just kept putting up with it, and eventually, we got 6 months into our relationship. So at that point, I'm thinking maybe I have a little bit more authority, to be like, hey, I don't like the way that she acts around you. You guys can't hang out like that anymore. And they would hang out alone together. He would take her to dinner. I literally tried telling him that the stuff that they do together is relationship stuff. And he was like, that's not true at all because we did all of this stuff before you and I even got together. So anyways, like I said, 6 months in, I'm like, hey, I don't like the way that you guys are hanging around each other. Once again, he gives me the same excuse. So he pretty much said that he didn't care. And the one night him and I were supposed to hang out, but he canceled on me last minute. And her and I didn't get along and she never Snapchatted me before, but then I get a Snapchat of her and him making out at his house.
Story time about how my mom found out my dad had a whole other family, and then he abandoned her with 5 kids. Yes, this is my mama's story time. I'm gonna try not to cry. My mama and specimen donor met when they were super young. They got married when she was 21 and she got pregnant at 22. And then they had 4 more children. My brother and I are twins and we're the babies of the family. Now, when my brother and I were a year old, my mom started noticing some wacky stuff. Specimen donor was out all hours of the night because he had business here and there. And by the way, my mom is raising 5 children, including 2 newborn twins. Thankfully, she had the help of my sister. At the time, she was already 15, so there's a huge age gap between her and I. Oh my god, I'm already losing it. Shout out to my amazing sister because she helped raise me and my siblings. In fact, when I wanted to go out to a party or something, my mom would tell me to go ask my sister for permission because she always said no to everything. So one day my mom confronts specimen donor. This is when he confesses that he had gotten someone else pregnant. Not only was she pregnant, she'd already had another kid of his, and that he was gonna go live with his new family. My mama kicked him right out. She enrolled herself in night school and became a lawyer. She took over my grandpa's dying law office, and she is now one of the most recognized lawyers in all of Central America. Thank you, Kosas, for working with me on this video. I seriously love you guys. And to all the mamas out there working hard, you are seen and you are loved. Bye.
Part 2 about how I found out that my boyfriend was cheating on me with his homeboy. So like I said, the one time I see them holding hands under the table, and whenever I asked my boyfriend why he was doing that, he was like, oh, it's because my best friend has social anxiety. And I'm like, okay. And then fast forward, we're all at this party and I see them kissing. And when I confronted him about it, he was like, oh, like we just like to play pranks like that sometimes. And I believed him because I really didn't think that my boyfriend was cheating on me with his homeboy. So fast forward to his birthday. I wanted to surprise him, so I went to his house, and to my shock, I see Kevin hooking up with his best friend. And when I confronted him about it, he was like, no, like, I swear I'm straight, da-da-da-da-da. I'm like, bro, why are you lying to me? Like, there's no reason to lie anymore. I caught you. So at that point, I literally just left his house and I blocked him, and I even begged my parents to let me move schools because I was so embarrassed. And from now on, I learned to not trust guys who are too close to their friends. Like, any guy who chooses their friend over me now is sus.
My husband forced me to watch him doing it with another woman. Disclaimer is not my story time, send me on Instagram. I'm an overweight 28-year-old. My husband hates the fact that I'm fat. He and I dated for 2 years before he asked me to marry him. At this time, everything was pretty much okay. We had a lot of fun together, we were basically best friends. But after we got married, I ended up gaining some weight. Mostly because I wasn't really taking care of myself, and because I've never cared about gaining weight or not. But to my husband, this is horrible. After I gained 20 pounds, he started saying things like, you're starting to look different and I don't like it. I can see your belly when we're having sex. And I gained another 20 pounds. And this is when he was really grossed out. If I asked him for a towel while I was showering, he would just throw it at me. Because apparently the sight of my naked body disgusted him. After a few weeks, I asked him to stop talking to me that way, and he said that he wouldn't because he didn't marry a fat woman. But I think he should love me no matter what. Even if I'm fat or skinny, he should still love me. He got to the point where he wouldn't even touch me or kiss me good morning or good night. And we used to have a pretty active sex life. Things got way worse. He started not coming home. Part 2 is up.
Okay, part 2. So like I said, I look in the mirror and I see myself smiling back at me. And that's whenever everything went south so quick. I sat on the bed, tried to pull myself together because I didn't want to make a fucking scene in front of everybody. But then I got caught in this fucking loop. And if you don't know what the loop is, then I'm going to tell you what it is. It's basically where you feel like you're doing the same thing over and over and over again. And then I started looking around at everybody and it looked like their faces were melting. One of my friends got up off his chair, walked to the other side of the room, and I watched him do that. But when I looked back over at the fucking chair, he was still sitting there. So I looked at my one friend that was sober, who I was actually really close with, and I think he saw the look in my eye and he was like, "Do you want to leave now?" And I just shook my head, yeah, like I could not deal with that shit anymore. So we go to his car and then we drive to my boyfriend's house. Because I could not go home. I would have got crucified. Well, we get in the house and as soon as his mom sees me, she knows that something's wrong. Like for part 3.
Story time about how I married a married man. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. Years ago, I met this guy that I thought was really cute. Stupid and naive, and I believed everything he said. I worked in customer service. He came into my job one day and just started flirting with me, and I was like thrilled. My job was really boring. This cute guy comes in and just starts talking to me, and I just fall in love. I'm not exaggerating. I know it's pathetic. I couldn't believe that he was talking to me and that he was interested in me. The next day, he asked me for my phone number, and I gave it to him. I went on one date, and I was legit in love. It starts to get creepy. He was 20 years older than me, and you could say he GROOMED'd me. I didn't know what was happening. I was 19, I had never had a boyfriend, and I barely had ever been kissed. He played me like a fiddle. After 2 weeks of going on dates, he finally kissed me. I knew that he was the man I wanted to marry. But when I told my coworker about him, she told me that he was married. I asked him about it. He told me that my coworker must have been mistaking him for his brother, because his brother and him had similar names and the brother was married. 3 days later, I asked one of his friends about it. That's when his friend tells me that he doesn't even have a brother and that he had been married for 15 years to a girl that was also 20 years younger than him. Even knowing this, I still married him. And you'll never guess how. Part 2 is already up. Story time about how I married a guy who was already married. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It's on Instagram. Even though I knew he was already married to somebody else, and even though I knew he lied to me about already being married, I still went ahead and married him. I was completely obsessed with him. Because he was already legally married to somebody else, we decided to use a different name for him, and somehow it worked. We actually drove 5 hours away to get married, used fake names, filed in a different state, and then we drove back to our hometown, where literally no one knew we were married. It was our little secret. But then the poo hit the fan. He kept promising that he would leave his wife. But one day, I'm having dinner with my parents at a restaurant, and guess who shows up? My husband with his wife. And boy, did they look happy. He was all over her, kissing her neck and her hands. Not only until he realized that I was in the restaurant did he stop. Then he actually had the audacity to come to my table, introduce himself to my parents, and tell him that he knew me from my job. All the while his wife was sitting at the table looking at me. And in that moment, I knew that she knew something was up. It's like she stared straight into my soul. She must have seen the way that I was looking at him, because she ran up to the table and introduced herself to me and my parents. When she tried to shake my hand, I didn't shake it back. My parents told me I was being rude, so I forced myself to shake her hand. 2 days later, she calls me and asks me what's up. But I lied and said that her husband was just a friend. Then I got an idea. I decided to be her friend. I asked her out to coffee and we had a great time. And little did she know that she was sitting with her husband's new wife. I feel like this way I can try to control their relationship from the inside. I confessed everything to my mom and she thinks I'm crazy. I think I'm a little crazy too. Am I completely wrong for this?